All right, today we're going to be looking at this idea of American imperialism, that idea of expanding our influence as a country, the United States, to other countries. And as you can see here, in three ways: economically, militarily, and of course, culturally. Now, here you see a political cartoon from the late 1800s uh, depicting the growth of the United States by looking at the growth of Uncle Sam. As you can see in 1783 here on the left, we see Uncle Sam is just a baby, the first 13 original states. And then in 1803, Uncle Sam starts to grow a little bit. We have the Louisiana Purchase. In 1819, this would be after the War of 1812 and the addition of the territory of Florida, not a state just yet, but the United States gets the territory of Florida. And it goes all the way through to 1898 with the Spanish American War, which we're going to look at in just a little bit. And by 1899, as you can see, the United States, Uncle Sam, has grown to be very large. And you can see there the ship under his arm, and we're going to talk about the role of the Navy and why having a strong Navy is very important in this whole idea of imperialism. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's go ahead and continue. As you go along, please be sure that you're taking notes. It can be sketch notes, it can be Cornell notes, but please be sure you're taking notes. This will be your fourth very important set of notes for this unit. Of course, you had the progressivism notes, labor movement, and you had the notes about the progressive presidents, and now America imperialism. So let's go to our next slide. This is a very important one, so please be sure you get this whole slide down. Imperialists. Now notice we have imperialists and we have anti-imperialists. Imperialists were those who wanted the United States to expand, grow even bigger, and get more land. Anti-imperialists, they would rather not the United States expand, just keep it the way it was. And so for imperialists, they said we needed colonies so we can compete economically, especially with countries like Great Britain and Germany. Anti-imperialists said, no, when you do this, if you grow and add other colonies, it just costs too much. There's a financial burden in trying to grow that empire. Imperialists also said that it is America's destiny. Remember, going back to before the Civil War, we talked about manifest destiny, going from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now we're taking this and expanding it throughout the world. And that's why at one point, when you take from the Philippines all the way over to Puerto Rico in 1898, basically it's had we, the United States, covered an area of 10,000 miles with how much land we had. So according to imperialists, it's our destiny to grow and to help take care of the weak and the poor. Anti-imperialists, though, said that instead of expanding and trying to get more land, we need to concentrate on solving problems here at home. Now, honestly, you can hear that debate today in people talking about things going on in the news. Imperialists, it's only honorable to keep land that Americans lost their lives for. So, in other words, America fought for it, soldiers bled and died. Why give that land back? Let's keep it. Whereas anti-imperialists said that non-white people cannot be assimilated into American society. In other words, you have you have people coming from other countries, and it's going to be hard for them to assimilate to become Americanized. And that was what some of the anti-imperialists said. Now, in today's time, 2023 and beyond, that point there can be very controversial. But the anti-imperialists at that time, that was one of their arguments. Imperialists also said to abandon our territories, if we gave it back after fighting and dying for it, that would appear cowardly to the rest of the world. The rest of the world would mock us, and therefore we can't give back the territory that we've won. Anti-imperialists, though, said it's a violation of democratic principles, not offering people the same rights as those of American citizens. So anti-imperialists, basically what they're arguing was, hey, if we're going to take this land, then we need to give them the same rights. And so definitely they were kind of countering here what the imperialists thought. And the final one for both, imperialists said to be a true world power, that imperialist idea, building an empire. The United States had to have colonies and navy bases. It was very important, and you're going to see Alfred T. Mann, his ideas. He wrote a book about why we needed a strong navy in order to be a strong country. And so that idea, especially under President Theodore Roosevelt, he's going to use that to expand, build navy bases in Cuba and the Philippines and Hawaii. We're going to, of course, get the Panama Canal. So definitely that's what the imperialists said. But anti-imperialists said to become a world power means we'll get involved in more wars. Huh. Kind of makes you stop and think with what we see here. So definitely both sides had some legitimate points, and that's why America in the late 1890s, early 1900s, that's why many Americans were split between imperialists and anti-imperialists. If you're not done with this, once you pause the video here, be sure you get this down. Here you can see some of the places that we gained in this time of imperialism. And in fact, most of this, except for the Virgin Islands, we're not going to hit that today. But really the rest of these we're going to take a closer look at. And just a quick chart, I would get this into your notes. In 1867, we get Alaska from Russia. 1898, now notice 1898 was a big year for the United States. We get Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. And then in 1903, the Panama Canal, and 1917, the Virgin Islands. Again, if you need to, pause and be sure you get this slide down. Well, Alaska. Alaska is very interesting because if you look at this part of Alaska right here, the way the islands, the Aleutian Islands, go out, Alaska is only about 30 miles from Russia. And Russia, in fact, owned Alaska originally. And many Americans thought it was foolish that we would buy Alaska from Russia. Why in the world would we buy a big hunk of ice? We bought it for $7.2 million, that whole state. Basically, that comes out to about 2 cents an acre. The person who did this, and notice, it's 1867. This is right after the Civil War. The person who did this was Secretary of State William Seward. And this became known as Seward's Folly. They thought he was foolish for buying Alaska. And the poor guy, he would go to his grave with everybody saying he was stupid for buying this land. Why would he do such a thing? Well, beyond his grave, of course, he could laugh because definitely Alaska proved to be very valuable. Well, how did it become valuable? Well, first of all, in 1896, after Seward had passed away, gold was discovered. The Klondike. What would you do for a Klondike bar? The Klondike, they found gold, and many Americans rushed to Alaska to get rich quick. And it turns out, of course, Alaska had other important resources. Fishing To this day, fishing is very important to the economy of Alaska. Lumber, and then of course a huge one is oil. That's why you have this here. But the oil is very important to Alaska. And of course, that is still debated between the two political parties to this day. Should we or should we not drill for oil there in Alaska? Next, we're going to turn to the acquisition of Hawaii. The United States had an interest in Hawaii because of two reasons. One, its location for trade routes, and because of its fertile soil. In the 1820s, going way back before what we've studied, in fact, this would have been what you studied in middle school, New England Protestant missionaries traveled to Hawaii to try to spread Christianity to the people of the islands of Hawaii. Their children in the 1870s are the ones who become major landowners in what is now the state of Hawaii. So here you have these missionaries, 1820s, they move there. By the 1870s, their children and grandchildren, they're the ones who are now the major landowners. In 1866, the king of Hawaii, he starts to try to attempt to restrict American influence. He doesn't like that so many Americans are coming into the islands, and so he tries to put a stop to it. However, the Hawaiian League is formed to overthrow the king and to persuade the United States to add, that's annexation. Annexation simply means to add Hawaii to the United States. And the person, Sanford, just like the town nearby, Sanford Dole, of course, you're probably familiar with him. If you go to the grocery store, the main brand of pineapples is usually Dole pineapples. He's the one who pushed for Hawaii to become part of the United States. And in 1887, they forced the king to sign a new constitution that would limit his power. As a result, the United States gets the rights to use Pearl Harbor as a Navy base. That one is very important because definitely Pearl Harbor is going to play a huge role in 1941 and in us going into World War II. And of course, basically it's Pearl Harbor that's going to change us from being isolationists, staying out of Europe's conflicts, to basically becoming a part of the global community where we become the world's police force. And so Pearl Harbor is going to be very, very important. But it's during this time that we get Pearl Harbor. 1891, the king is succeeded by his sister. She becomes the queen. And again, she tries to encourage Hawaiian nationalism, just like her brother did. They didn't want that American influence. And so Hawaii does not get annexed or become a part of our country until 1898 as a territory. And then in 1959, it becomes our 50th and final state so far to the United States. Now, here we're moving into the next part of imperialism. We've talked about Alaska, we've talked about Hawaii, and now we're going to talk about the very, very important war, the Spanish-American War. And as you can see, by this political cartoon, the villain here, according to the cartoon, is the country of Spain. And basically, Spain will be accused of sinking the USS Maine, a U.S. Navy ship, and that's why we are going to declare war on Spain. And most of the fighting is going to happen in Cuba and then in the Philippines. And you can see that here. So very important. Please be sure you're getting this into your notes. The Spanish-American War in 1898, we had three reasons why we were interested. One, economically. We had invested into Cuban sugar. We did not want those investments to be wasted. Secondly, humanitarian reasons. We sympathized with the Cubans and we supported them to revolt against Spain. And in some ways, we looked at it as almost 120 years earlier, similar to us rebelling against Britain. And so, yes, we supported Cuba and their revolt against Spain. And then third, expansionism, the idea of imperialism, to expand. We recognized the opportunity to take land from Spain, just like we did with Florida in 1819. So, the immediate causes that led to war. One, yellow journalism. You have seen these two names before, William Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. In today's time, if you are a reporter, if you report for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or if you're involved in places like CNN, Fox News, all those different ones, the prize you want to win as a reporter is the Pulitzer Prize. That is the top one. Well, these two men had the famous quote, "War sells newspapers." And so they're going to exaggerate it. And they're going to basically get us involved in the war because they want the war so they can be rich. Now, notice exaggerated. In today's time, another term for yellow journalism we would say is fake news. So understand, this idea of fake news has been around for a while, going also back to yellow journalism. A second reason we went to the war is the Delome note. This is where the Spanish minister had written a note saying that, quote, "President McKinley is weak and a bidder for the admiration of the crowds," unquote. Here you have a Spanish official calling out the President of the United States as being weak. And we, as Americans, we did not like that. But then the thing that pushed us over the edge to where we would go to war is the explosion, the sinking of the USS Maine. It exploded in the harbor there in Havana, Cuba. We blame Spain, of course, for the explosion. As you can see, this is the New York Journal. And notice it says Assistant Secretary Roosevelt, that's Teddy Roosevelt, convinced the explosion of the warship was not an accident. The Spanish did it. We got to go to war. And what it turns out, unfortunately, and I don't know why they did this, but back then, of course, a lot of those engines and those big ships were operated by steam and by boiler rooms. And for some reason, they had stored their barrels of gunpowder near the boiler room, and the barrels of gunpowder exploded, and the USS Maine went down, killing many Americans. And as a result, we go to war. Some call it the Splendid Little War. Thousands of Americans volunteered to fight. In fact, one of those, I'm going to skip to the bottom here, was Teddy Roosevelt. He volunteered and he got a group of cowboys and college athletes together, and they called themselves the Rough Riders, and they went to Cuba to fight. Now, one of the things you got to understand, Theodore Roosevelt met his group in Tampa. Please know that. They met in Tampa to leave to go to the war. The problem, when they were loading the ships in Tampa Bay to go to Cuba to fight, half of the athletes and cowboys didn't get on the ships. They missed it. And when Roosevelt got to Cuba and they came off the ship, he realized half of his troops weren't there. And so when they fight at the famous Battle of San Juan Hill, which we'll get to in just a minute, Roosevelt, has to be saved by the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers were African American soldiers and led by Pershing. I'm getting ahead of myself. You'll see that in a minute. And they're the ones who are going to help save Roosevelt in this war. So, They meet in Tampa, led by Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Riders, and they go and they capture San Juan Hill. And you see the famous picture here. You see the American flag. This is after the battle's over. This is after they've been saved by the Buffalo Soldiers. And you'll notice you don't see African Americans in this. So this picture is very misleading. But there he is. You can see. You see that mustache and those famous glasses. There's Roosevelt right there. There on San Juan Hill. Again, the Buffalo Soldiers, they were a black regiment led by Pershing. Pershing's going to be very important. Almost 20 years later, actually 19 to 20 years later, in World War I. He's going to be the main general for the United States in World War I. And of course, in World War II, Pershing would have a tank named after him in his honor, the Pershing tank. And Pershing and these Buffalo Soldiers, as you can see down here, are the ones who go in and save Roosevelt. Well, the fighting wasn't just centered on Cuba. It was also in the Philippines. Roosevelt sent Admiral Dewey in the American Navy, and they fought the Spanish there in Manila Bay in the Philippines on the other side of the world in the Pacific. And of course, the U.S. Navy does capture and defeat the entire, notice that word, entire Spanish fleet. Some of the facts about the war, why it's called a splendid little war. Well, notice it only lasted from April to August. So it was a quick war, thank goodness. It was Spain versus America. The president was William McKinley. And most of the fighting took place in Cuba, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. Notice that last point. More Americans died from disease than from the battles with Spain. The main disease coming from, of course, the mosquito. Many Americans would die from malaria. The results of the war. The war lasted 4 months, as I said. We win. 5,000 die, most from disease. And the Treaty of Paris, please don't let this confuse you. We've had so many Treaty of Parises in our history as the United States. The Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolution. It would end the War of 1812. It's going to end this war. So please be sure, don't let that confuse. This is the Treaty of Paris that ends the Spanish-American War. Cuba is granted independence, and we lease Guantanamo Bay, which is very controversial to this day because, of course, we still own Guantanamo Bay in Cuba to this day. We also get the Philippines for $20 million, and Spain gives us Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Here you can see a famous political cartoon of the time. You see President McKinley, and he's serving Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam's trying to decide what he wants. And you can see up here the different areas that we gained from the Spanish-American War. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and some of the islands like Guam, etc. Well, the people in the Philippines, they weren't too keen on the United States taking over the Philippines. And so they're going to have their own war, and they're going to kind of rebel against the United States. The United States paid $20 million, which back then, a lot of money. Still is to us today, yes. But I'm talking about as a nation. $20 million to the Philippines. There is a provisional government that is set up. And McKinley felt like they were unfit for self-government. The Filipinos, though, they want their own independence. And they're really not going to get this until after World War II. So in 1899, the very next year, they rebel and they fight a 3-year war against the United States. We don't talk really much about this war. We know about the Spanish-American War, but we don't really talk about the fighting there in the Philippines. In the rebellion by the Philippines against us, we have around 4,300 soldiers die, and the Filipinos had 20,000 die and 250,000 wounded. It cost us we paid 200 million for it, and it cost us 400 million to keep it. Congress in 1902 is going to pass the Philippine Government Act that said that the Philippines would be ruled by a governor and a two-house legislature. It sounds familiar. In Florida, we have a governor and we have two houses there in Tallahassee. Well, that's the way they're going to set it up in the Philippines. It's going to stay basically until invaded by Japan in World War II, and they finally get their total independence from both the United States and Japan right after World War II in 1946. That leads us to Puerto Rico. And again, as you're going along, if you need to pause and get some notes, be sure you do that, rewind, etc. But Puerto Rico, during the Spanish-American War, we get Puerto Rico, and we make it a territory like Samoa and Cuba. We passed the Four-Acre Act that said that the governor and the upper house had to be appointed by United States officials. The lower house in Puerto Rico could be elected by Puerto Ricans. Well, as you can imagine, that didn't set too well with many of the native people of Puerto Rico. And so in 1917, the Jones Act is passed that made Puerto Ricans American citizens, and they could elect both houses of legislature on their own, and plus they got one vote in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. In 1952, Puerto Rico becomes a commonwealth, but it does stay a part of the United States. Still to this day, the United States has sovereignty over Puerto Rico. So what can the United States do? Well, the United States, as you can see here, the Congress legislates many parts of Puerto Rican life, including citizenship, currency, the money, the postal service, foreign affairs, defense, military, communications, labor, etc. Many living in Puerto Rico do not have to pay U.S. federal tax, but in return, as you can see here at the end, those living in Puerto Rico cannot vote for the president in the United States. So you don't have to pay tax, but you don't get to vote for president. And so that has been, now, by the way, before we continue, in 2012, the people of Puerto Rico voted to become the 51st state, and Congress has not reacted yet. It's been a while. It's been over a decade now. And the reason why they're dragging their feet is because if you make Puerto Rico a state, that means you got to give, some states have to give up some of their representatives in the House of Representatives so Puerto Rico can have more. And that is what the holdup is right now. So, well, at least that's part of it. So we'll have to see. Yes, the people of Puerto Rico they have voted to become the 51st state, but Congress and the president, several different administrations, have not acted on that just yet. This will lead us to the other part, the Panama Canal. Notice, before the Panama Canal, if you wanted to ship something by big tanker boats, you would have to go from New York around South America, and this part's very dangerous waters down here, all the way over here to San Fran. Notice that's 13,000 miles. Whereas if you build the Panama Canal, you can go through here, and it cuts it down from 13,000 to 5,200. So that is why we wanted the Panama Canal. And the way to do this is by expanding the Navy. Well, Colombia, they are actually the country that owned Panama. And Roosevelt sent word to Panama that if you had a revolution, of course, we would help. In 1903, there was a treaty that was drafted. I need to back up a second. I thought I had the dates there, and I guess I don't have that part. Basically, What happens is we send a couple of big U.S. Navy ships to the area. Colombia quickly, within 4 days, surrenders, and Panama becomes its own country. As a result, Panama agrees to give us or lease the land for $10 million, and then we pay Panama $250,000 a year for 99 years. And yes, in 1999, the Panama Canal was returned to Panama, and now, in today's time, the country that controls the Panama Canal is not the United States, it's not Panama, but it is China. And China does control the Panama Canal. Um, you can see here, oh, here it is. I was just ahead of myself. November 2nd, 1903, American gunboats show up in Panama. We recognize Panama as an independent nation. And November 6th, like I said, 4 days later, we recognize Panama, and Colombia has surrendered basically, and we begin to build the canal. So again, it's going to shorten our time going through the Panama Canal to California and vice versa. And here it is. Now notice, when they're building the canal, part of this has natural lakes, so we didn't have to dig that part. But many Americans are going to die building this canal. Again, yes, the work was very hazardous, very dangerous, but the biggest thing that Americans die to, again, will be the mosquito. And so we start in 1903, and it's not completed for another 10 years in 1913. Roosevelt is going to be the first president to leave the United States while president. So he's the first one to go abroad. Of course, this is way before Air Force One. I mean, airplanes just invented in 1903. So definitely he didn't have planes to get places. And so he takes boats, and he's the first president to leave the United States while being president. He visits Panama in 1906. And today, of course, it still moves people and goods all around the world, the Panama Canal. You can see here, you have the lock system. Notice the two sides, you got to connect two different sides. The Caribbean, which is our side. I wish it was flipped here, but this is our side close to Florida. And then here's the Pacific, more towards California. And between this side and this side is a difference in elevation. So you got to build locks, or kind of like steps. And they look like this. They go in, they close the gate, they fill it with water, the boat rises up, they open the next gate, goes in, and you just keep going down the staircase. It takes a little while, but very ingenious lock system to get across the Panama Canal. Well, again, to help protect that Panama Canal and to protect those ships going back and forth between New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles, Roosevelt creates what he calls the Great White Fleet, the first modern Navy. And like I said, Alfred T. Mann believed that national greatness was determined by having a strong Navy. In 1907, of course, Roosevelt, just like he read The Jungle, he reads Mann's book and he says, you know what, I agree with that. So let's build a new Navy. And we built 4 new destroyers, 16 battleships, and we take it on a world cruise basically to tell the rest of the world, watch out, here comes the United States, and we're flexing our muscles to show that we're strong. His motto was, speak softly and carry a big stick. In other words, we don't want to cause problems, but if you cause problems with us, we've got the military backing to protect us and support us. And so we build this strong Navy known as the Great White Fleet. And that way, the world knows the United States is definitely gaining power. Because remember, really, until World War II, the nation that had the power and control was Great Britain. But that's all going to change after World War II. Well, we also had what we call the open door policy. Our dealings with Asia and especially China. Here you can see The yellow was controlled by France, the blue by Japan, the green, Germany, the orange, Britain, and red, Russia. But notice who's missing? The United States. And so we want to be involved with the trade with China. And so we want what we call this sphere of influence, where a foreign nation has exclusive rights with trade, mines, and roads. In other words, these different areas that are shaded here, if you're trading in this area, it's only going to be through the British. You have to respect and have those different spheres to that nation's involved. And we wanted our own sphere. So as a result, we have the Boxer Rebellion, just like it sounds there. A group of boxers are going to rebel in China. And it's because the Chinese boxers did not want foreigners in China. And so the Society of Right and Harmonious Fists, the boxers, begin the rebellion. And in 1900, they attack Western missionaries and traders in North China, and they kill 300 foreigners. And so as a result, the West, they're going to send in their own armies, Great Britain, France, etc. And the rebellion is going to last 55 days. And yes, notice it says international. Germany, Britain, France, and the United States. We want to be involved. And so we send our own troops to help put down the Boxer Rebellion. Well, that is your set of notes on American imperialism. This part, actually, you're going to do something a little bit different. So just ignore this part. You'll actually look on Canvas to see the next, the assignment that goes with this. If you need to, please be sure to go back and look at your notes and be sure to get them down. Be sure to be studying them. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for taking the notes. I'll talk to you next time.